The International Monetary Fund has provided a cautiously optimistic evaluation of Nigeria's development as it continues to implement some of its most ambitious economic reforms in decades. Now, following a 2-week trip to Lagos and Abuja for the IMF's 2025 article consultation, which ended on April 15th, the decision was made. Additionally, it preceded the 2025 IMF World Bank spring meetings underway in Washington, D.C. The IMF praised the reform momentum while also issuing sobering cautions about potential hazards and structural flaws. Uwaoma, who is founder and managing director of Xavier's Consulting, joins me now to discuss this further. Isa, good morning. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Well, let's begin with the IMF's latest, article report. Would you say that Nigeria is truly on a path to recovery, or are we just seeing a temporary fiscal patchwork here?
Honestly, I feel sorry for the government because they're in a crossroad between giving flowers or building gardens, right? Giving flowers or building gardens, and they chose to build gardens. One of the fundamental things I see is that the reforms are very strategic, they're very fundamental, so they're very good. I don't think they're just trying to patch things, right? The problem is that they have a hard time trying to communicate that because people will temporarily go through stress before they get better. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. The reforms, I think, are very fundamental, from the subsidy removal to unification of the dollar rates and all that. The illustration for me is trying to change a tire with people in the car, right? A car, right? So that's the problem. You have to slow down, park somewhere, and then change the tires. But are people willing to do that, especially when they're in a hurry? That's the fundamental problem. But I think it's very fundamental, it's very strategic, and I think that we're on the wrong path. Sadly, Nigeria is going to make progress, but Nigerians will have to take that risk.
So you reckon there is certainly going to be longevity, but there is just a communication gap that we need to basically turn. Now, the IMF praised the removal of fuel subsidies as a difficult but necessary reform. From your standpoint, how has this move developed? Has it basically delivered any real value to the average Nigerian? Yes?
Value to Nigeria, yes. Real value to Nigerians, no. So
okay, please clear up that distinction.
It's choosing Nigeria over Nigerians, right? Nigeria-wise, yes, long-term. Right, Nigeria-wise, I mean, we have a better reserve, right, external reserve, right, we have a better balance of trade and balance of payment, right, but all of that are book grammar. The reality about it is that people on the streets are paying 3 times the price that they would normally pay for transport, 3 times for petrol, and there's hunger on the streets. You can't take that out. There's no grammar you want to speak. So in the long term, it might make sense. Short term, Nigerians are actually worse off currently than they were 2 years ago in the food in the table, the expenses that they make, the options that they have to do every day, from school fees to food to clothing to shelter. So that's the real reality. Is there real value for Nigerians as of now? No. But for Nigeria, yes, we have a better GDP growth, we have a better management of our inflation, right, with the monetary policy rates and all that, trying to curb inflation, right steps in the right directions. But then again, Nigerians aren't as intellectual to understand that in the real context. And beyond that, we have trust issues, and those trust issues are well-founded. In the past, we don't trust our government, and the government in its part isn't showing us consistently that while they're telling us to cut costs because they're trying to do the right things, they're not also telling us that while they're doing that, they're not also trying to lead by example. So that widens the trust issues we have. So no, it's not real value for Nigerians, in my own opinion, but it's good value for Nigeria. And in the long run, if they keep at that path, we'd all smile. But
so yet again, we're playing the long game, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Literally. But that communication is also going to be key, especially when we have trust issues existing. Now, we saw inflation rise again in March. Food prices are up. Let's get your assessment of the central bank's high interest rate policy.
Okay, so let's look at the realities, right? Circle of concern versus circle of influence. Circle of concerns are the things that concern you, but you can't do anything about it. Circle of influence, I think, can do a lot about it. So what has happened is circle of concern. International politics playing out, from all the tariff games that Donald Trump is playing and all of the volatility of our oil. Don't forget that 80% of Nigerians' export revenue comes from oil. And then we pegged our budget at about $75 per barrel, right? And currently, as we speak, is about 60-something dollar per barrel. So that we don't have any control about international oil pricing and all that. So the reality about the whole thing right now is that those recent inflation increase is coming from things we have no control over, literally, international politics, international oil pricing and all that type of stuff. So I think that's the real issue. But if the monetary policies were lower, right, it would have been worse. So that's the truth. So everyone's saying, oh yeah, the CBN, it's a lot of intelligent conversation. But then again, I mean, it's hard to discuss 4x4 idea with maybe a 2x2 system, right? So I think that's the real issue. Yes, the interest rates are extremely high, right? But that interest rate, you know what the whole math around that is. It was in a way to sort of curb the high inflation. So because the relationship between inflation and interest rates, if you want to curb it, it has to be inversely proportional, right? Higher and lower, right? So increase your interest rate so that you can reduce your inflation. That's the fundamental problem. But how many people understand this? Provided that there's hunger in the streets, it's really hard to get this to the right people.
And I like that you mentioned that, because you've highlighted a couple of times now the intellectual level of this conversation, which of course that's very valid, but the average man on the street doesn't really care about all that lingo, does he? He just wants to know, what does this mean, and why am I spending a lot more on my food every day? So while we appreciate, the intelligent part of the conversation, that doesn't work for everyone. But let's look at Nigeria's balance of payments, which showed a 6.83 billion naira surplus in 2024. Now, does this signal a true turnaround, or are we masking some bigger structural issues?
I was just going to even say that in the middle of all the 2023 drama with the elections, Peter Obi was busy churning out numbers, and in one of the popular quotes that went viral, Tinubu says, "Na data will go chop." Now he has to ask people, "Na data." People have to ask him, "Na data will go chop," because all of that is just data in the end. But if you look at that surplus is good, right? Considering that we're coming from a deficit, right? Balance of trade deficit. But if you look at the real levers and the real triggers for that surplus, you find out that one of them is a drastic reduction of our petroleum imports, thanks to Dangote refinery, right? And of course, remittance is also a major factor. A lot more people have jackpot, so they're sending money back home, right? So those are the things that's counting to that surplus. But in the long run, I think that it's good, right? It's really solid. We just hope that it can be sustained. But don't forget that the volatility of the oil, because oil is one of the reasons why we also have that surplus. We have a reserve now that is better because it's excessive oil. 35% of electricity subsidy was removed. People talk about petrol subsidy. They forget that actually subsidy reduced with electricity with the band A, band B, and all that band H, if you know what I mean, right? So in the end, that's the real issue. But yes, good reserve. The fact that we've moved from deficit to surplus, that's good, but in the reality, we're hoping that it's long-term, right? The real long-term is if you can get foreign direct investments that are built around development, around manufacturing, around factories, around all that. As long as it's temporary people who are just trying to take advantage of our monetary policy rates and all that, right? So that's not a long-term and very sustainable model. But for now, yes, congratulations. The real data is that we have a surplus in balance of payments.
Yeah, certainly. And speaking of that, we're hearing a lot about a renewed investor confidence. I mean, given, the portfolio inflows, but you also mentioned FDI. We saw that drop sharply. How do you explain this contradiction?
It's a contradiction. It's like an oxymoron, literally, but this is really what it is. It's temporary speculators versus permanent and long-term investors. It's like, who would you take serious, the tourist or the guy that's coming to invest? You see, the tourists will come for the good things, for the scenarios, but they are short-term. Tourists don't stay in the place. Any small trigger, they're out. There's a small crisis in the town, they're out, right? So all of that grammar, all of that whole thing, it comes from not institutional investors, right, but temporary investors, in my own opinion, right? People who are taking advantage of things like exchange rates, our dollar, and all that type of things, dollar to naira stability. So I think that the ultimate solution, right, would not even be looking at all that things, looking at people who are here for the long term. That's why I used the example that said, look, you have an option. Do you want to give us flowers, or do you want to build us a garden? It's really your choice. I mean, flowers look good in the short term. It's very emotional, it's very sentimental, but I mean, it will die and wither down, right? All of those temporary investors, the portfolio investors, they live at the shortest, right? But the fact that the oxymoron and the metaphor of irony in terms of inversely proportional, because on one end, how can you say that we're having good investors in and then foreign direct investment is crashing? It doesn't make any logical sense. What is showing in common sense, non-technical, is that the people who are speculating are putting their money more. The people who are doing long-term foreign direct investments don't trust the system enough. And until they trust the system enough and they bring their money to build factories, to build warehouses, to build production and efficiency systems that help drive production, that increases your exports enough for us, first take care of the internal domestic needs and then export. All that thing, once again, like I always say, is grammar. So FDIs are still wary, right? Speculators as international investors are excited. So who in the long run do you need more? You actually need the foreign direct investors. So that's really what it is.
Well, I mean, trust is key, but we all know that we really want that guardian, don't we? I mean, the IMF is urging Nigeria to maintain a neutral fiscal stance in light of falling oil prices. How risky is our current budget?
Very risky, very risky. It's a delicate balance between an actual corporate finance conversation and a wish list. Nigerian government over the years has created wish list every year as budget, right? Because, I mean, let's be realistic with this thing and let's be serious, right? You pegged your budget at 75 barrel, right? One of the biggest triggers is the barrel per. There are two main triggers, how much you're speculating that the barrel per oil would be in dollars and how much you can produce, right? I mean, I think we projected us at 2 million barrel per day at 75 billion. If you look at the reality today, that's not the reality today. Dollar is, a barrel of oil is less than 75, and we're not producing 2 million barrels. So if you look at this math and look at these fundamentals, you start to see that it's looking like a wish list. But what the IMF actually meant also is to say, look, you have to recalibrate your scale because what you assumed is not what it is. Let's not forget that the GDP growth rate is actually also, inflation and GDP growth rate is also not favorable to the current reality. So I think it's looking like a wish list, and then government has to now look at it and say, for our spending, because budget is revenue and expenditure. Now, for expenditure, can we not be reckless with our expenditure? And all the facts, this is not the time for all that fat elephant project. I mean, I still heard, I'm not sure how valid this is, about the Aso Rock, for example, going off the grid to invest billions in, guys, let's be serious, NPV, IRR, payback period doesn't support that. You need to invest as much as 5 to 10 billion in a small community to go off the grid. If you go off the grid, if the government, if the president is going off the grid, why should we trust your grid, right? If you know what that means, right? So, and I mean, one day I was parked in my car and the president was passing. I counted 60 cars that was passing in Lagos, but we all had to be on standstill. It doesn't make a lot of sense economically, but the body language of a president with 60 cars passing shows waste. There's no grammar to it. You have to eliminate 3 things for people to trust you: waste, delay, and inconsistency. Japanese guys are known to be the most efficient people, and they call it muda muri mura. Once you can eliminate muda muri mura, muda means waste, delay, and inconsistency. So government has to work on those 3 things. It's too much waste, and that budget now has to cut down that waste. There's too much delay. Else you're just giving us promises, audio promises. And then the last one is inconsistency. Our government over the years, and it's not just in Nigerian, this current government or an APC problem, for the last 40 years, our government has been consistently inconsistent with where we consistently want to be. I don't know if that sort of makes sense, but that's really what
does. I mean, the optics are certainly very important, and with the points you also just highlighted, it also reinforces the notion of that widened trust issue. You're going to have to fix the optics to renew the trust. We can't have this conversation, Asa, without looking at food insecurity. Now, many would term this a national emergency. Would you say that the government's interventions are enough, or are we, in fact, underestimating the scale of this crisis?
No, there's no such thing as overestimating it, right?
Under or over?
No, the reality about it is that it's worse than it really is, right? The insecurities, food insecurities has so much touch points to it, right? First of all, the waste between production and markets, right? Storage, that's a real problem. Logistics waste. And let's not forget that the insecurity around the areas that produce large, I mean, the Benue drama, the Plateau drama, and all that. Those are real life issues. So I think that the real issue with food insecurity requires a real state of emergency. Just do the same thing you did with rivers, with agriculture. Take it that serious, literally, because when you talk about things like inflation and you talk about the real, how it affects Nigerians, food is a major variable. Yeah. 98% of Nigerians don't have 500,000 naira in their account. We have 200 million Nigerians plus, and only 10,000 of them are millionaires in dollars. That's 0.00% of something. Right, so if you look at the reality about it, we spend majority of our money on food. The average Nigerian that collects 100K a month spends the largest chunk of that 100K on food. That explains why your richest men in Nigeria sell sugar, salt, flour, food. Right, so food insecurity is so real, but the problem now is how is government going to react to it, right? From the real world insecurity to the other macroeconomics around them, right? Creating infrastructure, creating logistics, creating subsidies around fertilizers, and driving sincerity of purpose to what the government interventions are doing around balancing that, both from the producer perspective and from the consumer perspective.
All right, so we're certainly at a very critical juncture. If you're just joining us, or you joined us midway, I've been chatting with Uwaoma, who is founder and managing director at Xavier Consulting. I want to thank you so much for joining. We'll see you again very soon.